with us yesterday for domain one. You know a little bit about building the strategic foundation surrounded around the PMI RMP and just building out risk management for your projects in general. So I
with
am
us yesterday
oop,
for domain one. You knew a little
sorry about that. Trying to make sure everything's running here smoothly. All right. So yeah, domain one yesterday, we went over the strategic foundation of what is going on for the PMI RMP. Today, we're focusing on domain two. So, again, reviewing from yesterday, the risk management plan, we need to make sure that that is documented. Our stakeholders are aligned. We have roles and responsibilities. They are clear across the board. Now, once we have that, we have the foundation set. What should be our focus? What do we have to work on? Well, that is the question that everyone should be asking themselves. Because when we do all our planning, it's time to actually go in, get the work done. And we're looking at what could go wrong and what could go right. And that's where we enter into domain two, risk identification. This is 23% of your PMI RMP exam. And what most people are getting wrong about this is that they think this is just brainstorming. They think it's just, hey, we're going to talk about risks. We're going to get people in the room. We're going to have a meeting and we're just going to throw some ideas on the whiteboard, put them into a risk register and call it a day. But what PMI and the RMP actually expect is something completely different. PMI expects continuous identification, context awareness, documentation discipline. So, what I want you to think of domain two is I want you to think of domain two as the identification heartbeat. It never stops throughout your project, it's always beating, always listening. From project kickoff all the way through closeout, you need to focus on identification of your risks. So, again, this is the risk management identification heartbeat. Think about it that way, it's going to help you out. Now, before we jump into this completely, are you actively preparing for the RMP? Or are you just here to learn some new content? Drop it down in the comments. Let me know what are your thoughts when it comes to that. And also, remember, you can grab, and I will drop it into the chat here, the free PMI-RMP ECO breakdown. And this is something new. I just got the MVP put together and I am pushing this thing out to people. So I did get a question yesterday on what is this? So why is this something you want to download? Well, let me drop this link down in the chat right there. And this is what we're looking at when it comes to this ECO breakdown. All right, you should be able to see it now. Let me get myself back on there. There we go. All right, so this is what it looks like. This is a study guide. It's something to help you all out as you study for your RMP exam. Quick little video, me showing you what this is. And then in here, you have a breakdown of each domain. Link over to a YouTube video where I talk about each domain. I'll probably even add in some links to this series once I have it done from the live events. And then in here, when you go to each, so today we're in domain two, we're going to start with conduct risk identification. When you come in here, if there's a video I have already associated to it, you can see it. It has the enabler breakdown, some concepts and definitions, what PMI's lens is, an agile and hybrid angle. And then I have you a couple practice questions, exam traps, a memory anchor, and where to go deeper, information that you can get to go deeper into this area. This is the whole thing. And so link is down in the comments in the chat right now where you can actually jump in there and you can get access to this ECO breakdown. It's going to be the link. It's going to be in the description for this. It'll be in the description for each domain all week. So you can pick this thing up whenever you feel like it. All right. So on that, let's get back to what we have. Domain 2, everything, all 5 domains are in there, but we're going to go through all the domains this week in this live series. So domain 2, identification, 23% of your exam. 23%, again, you're looking at roughly 26, 27 questions overall. And this ties domain 3, we're going to get into tomorrow, when we get into risk analysis, but it ties that into domain 1, which was all about setting this foundation. So in this domain, we have 4 different tasks. First, we have conduct risk identification exercises. Then we have examine assumptions and constraint analysis, followed by document risk triggers and thresholds based on the context and environment that we're working in. Finally, we have develop the risk register. This is 4 tasks, but here's the thing. These 4 tasks, I mean, if you remember yesterday, we went over domain 1. Domain 1 had 6 tasks. It was 22% of the exam. That's why domain 1 takes so long to get through, because there's so much information involved. But at the same time, there's, less questions. So you really need to dive into that. But at the same time, these 4 tasks, they are, broken up amongst a larger group of questions. So this is a bigger group when it comes to your actual exam. And these 4 tasks that we're going to look at today, they really don't run linear, these 4 tasks, they're not a linear sequence that you run through just once. This is a repeating cycle that you need to run throughout the life of the project. Domain 1, set the rules. That's what we talked about yesterday. We talked about establishing a foundation of what we're doing. Domain 2, we're finding our risks. And the quality that we do, the quality of what we get out of domain 2, is really determined from domain 1, but also what we pull from here is going to impact all the future domains. Because you can't analyze a risk you've never identified. You can't respond to a risk you've never documented. And you can't monitor something that isn't in your register already. That is why I call domain 2 the heartbeat. If you get it wrong here, the whole system is going to suffer. So drop me down in the chat. Which of the 4 sound unfamiliar to you the most right now? If you were like, hey, I don't understand assumption and constraint analysis. You don't understand triggers and thresholds. Let me know, whether you're watching this live right now or if you're watching in the future. Drop it down there. All right. So task 1, that's where we're going to jump into first here. Conduct risk identification exercises. Task 1 is where risk identification begins. And the first thing you need to understand when it comes to this, it starts with structured collaboration. Too often, project managers, project risk managers, we're left to our own devices, right? We're left to find all the risks ourselves. But according to PMI, according to your RMP, this cannot be a solo review. It can't be one person's gut feeling. This needs to be structured, collaborative, and facilitated overall. That means we have risk workshops, interviews, focus groups. using concepts like the Delphi technique. And the trick is that we have to pull in our subject matter experts, our key stakeholders, the ones who know where the problems are and where they're usually going to show up. Because the people closest to the technical work, the vendors who've done this before, the stakeholders who remember what went sideways last time, you bring them together. You ask them the right questions and you listen. You listen to what they have to show you. But it doesn't stop at the conversation. You also analyze everything that already exists. So you need to make sure that you're looking at meeting notes, transcripts, project documentation. In today's environment, we have AI. AI can go through all your data, your system logs, your audio transcripts from past project meetings or your current meeting and your meeting minutes. And you do this all within your business context because a risk that matters in one project could be irrelevant or super relevant to another. So context determines what an actual threat, context determines what is an actual threat and what's just noise overall. So the whole point behind risk identification exercises is that we actually understand what the risks are. And there's tons of methods that we can do this. But one of the key items, and this is bullet 4 under task 1, domain 2, is indicate risks as threats or opportunities. And this is a critical distinction when it comes to the RMP and risk management in general. And as RMP candidates and as future PMI-RMP professionals, or RMP risk management professionals, the P is a professional, can't say RMP professional, but the whole point behind this is that when you identify a risk, you need to make sure you identify threats and opportunities. A threat is has a negative impact on project objectives. An opportunity has a positive one. And yes, there are such things as positive risks. These are risks that honestly they could do us some good. If this happens, we are going to save some time. We're going to get some time back. We won't have to spend as much money on these resources. We can speed up the project by 2 weeks. That is an opportunity. That is something that you can do that has a positive effect on your project. In doing that and making that single label between each one is going to be the basis for whenever we get into risk analysis, because that analysis approach changes per opportunity or threat. The response strategy that we use for each one, the ownership, the priority level that we end up assigning it is all dependent on, is this going to hurt us or is this going to help us? So an example for this, just so we're clear, is let's say you have a new technology that could speed up delivery by 20%. It's untested on your type of project, though. Is that a threat or an opportunity? Well, you can answer this both ways. And this is something I like to teach my students when they get into the real world. A single risk can be a threat and an opportunity. And this is an example. The speed improvement is a potential opportunity from this technology. Like we said, it can speed up our delivery by 20%. That's huge. If you have 10, if this is a 10-month project, that's 2 months we could wipe off the table almost. So that's a huge opportunity. But the speed improvement, but the untested nature behind it, that's the potential threat. It's uncertain. We don't know if that's going to work. So you can carry both forward into your analysis, determine which side actually dominates, or if there's a dependency on if that's going to work, then you just make sure that you're monitoring that dependency as an opportunity, as something that can work for you. All right. That is the rigorous identification process that you need to go through. And when it comes to the exercises associated to capturing the full picture of uncertainty, there are tons of different methods. I have a video in my YouTube channel on the Bearded Risk PM where I go through 7 of those risk identification exercises that you can use. So definitely jump in there. Understand that brainstorming is only one option. And generally, what I like to call the brainstorming is, it's the basis. You're going to walk in and brainstorm with your team. How are we going to solve this problem? Let's go through, set all this up, go through, do a good whiteboard, put everything up on the whiteboard, and figure out where we're at. But from there, you can lean into other aspects. You can use Pestle, Delphi. You can use interviews. There's so many different options. So don't get your head just wrapped around doing brainstorming. All right, that is task 1. If you have any questions along the time while I'm talking, please just drop it down in the chat. All right, now let's move into task 2. If task 1 is where you find the risks, task 2 is where you find the ones that are hiding. This is the assumption iceberg that sits out there. Above the waterline is everything your team is aware of, right? You are able to see the different risks. Below the waterline, now we're getting into these unknowns. And below that waterline, you also have assumptions and constraints. Your project plan is silently resting on these. Every project runs on assumptions. We all make assumptions. And no, you're not making, a what of you and me. All right. Assumptions are necessary. Just you got to make sure they're intelligent assumptions and you're tracking them appropriately. Because every one of those assumptions is a potential risk. If I'm assuming that by week 3, I'm going to have John, a critical resource assigned to my project, I need to analyze that because that is a risk. Because if John doesn't show up, I don't have a critical resource for that sprint, for that batch of work that has to get done. Then I'm in a tough position. So our whole job here in task 2 is to go through our assumption and constraint analysis and figure out where are they, what are they doing, and how are they impacting our projects. And this all starts with a very simple document, an assumption log. Every assumption, like we talked about, John, if we assume John's going to be on this project in month 3, then we just make sure that we put that in our assumption log. Because every assumption, and this has to deal with every assumption you made in the project. When you're going through planning, you're assuming. The key about assumptions that I missed right now is that assumptions are something that we assume is true so we can continue on with what we're working on. That is why it's critical that you put these in your risk register or your assumption log or both to make sure that you understand exactly what you are assuming to keep your planning going. Now, constraints, these are the things that box in our flexibility. So for these, you need to ask a simple question: what must be true for this plan to work? And then what happens if it doesn't? Right? So from there, once we take our assumptions, we take our constraints, we categorize them. Are they schedule assumptions, budget constraints, technical dependencies, regulatory requirements, resource availability? Each category carries different risk profiles and different escalation paths overall. Yes. Okay. So for those, just so you know, I do have a Zoom chat over here as well as the YouTube. And Zoom, if you want to jump on that, that is how you just have to join my PMI-RMP Exam Prep community. That I will drop a link right now into the chat, or you can look in the description. It will be in there as well. But in that chat, I just got a great thing that I just skipped constraints, the actual definition. So I gave the definition of a assumption, but not the constraint. So constraints are what limits us. So let's say, example being, on my project that I was working on, there was a regulation that was coming out. We knew about it. They were like, hey, we're going to have a new regulation. It goes into effect as of July 1st. And because that went into effect as of July 1st, we therefore had to have our project done by June 15th. So that way we had 2 weeks for implementation to make sure that everything was aligned for July 1st. So constraints, they limit what we can do. You know, they put a barrier. We have to get this done by this time. Or constraint could be you have $1 million. That's it. Or you have 100,000, 10,000, depending on the level of your project. So constraints limit us in some way. And these are critical to make sure you're tracking because, like for us, I had a 15 June. I had to have my stuff done to make the 1 July constraint that we had for implementation of the project. So that might meant we had to throw some resources. We had to throw extra cash at it. So that is exactly what assumption and constraint analysis we're looking at. So when it comes to these, why do assumptions and constraints matter for us? Why, what is task 2 really looking to solve when it comes to assumption and constraint analysis? Your team assumes vendor delivery by July 1st. That assumption is sitting in the plan, but nobody's challenged it. Nobody's talked about it. Nobody has looked at how are we going to do this. But they've also haven't asked what happens if we don't. So now we got to think through the cascading effects that this happens. Because if a vendor misses that July 1st date, your integration team can't start, your testing window compresses, your go live date moves, your client agreement is now at risk. And you might be looking at a financial penalty, like I said, for my July 1st date. So one assumption, unchallenged, constrained, an entire chain reaction. And if any of that was sitting on my critical path, then I'm definitely having a lot of problems. So this is about, so one of your jobs, one of the things that you need to look at when you're looking at assumption and constraint analysis is that you're trying to predict this cascading effect that it's going to have on your project objectives. And this can't be theoretical. You are literally walking the dog, as I would say in the military. You're walking the dog on how are we going to accomplish this? How are we actually, what are those cascading effects? And this is one of the most valuable things that as a risk professional you can do for your organization. And it's one of the most important things that anyone can do when it comes to understanding those assumption constraints and those impacts on your project. So your role here is not always to identify these. Again, that's why we have subject matter experts. We bring them in. But our role is to facilitate the actual analysis over these assumption constraints. Ask the why. Ask what happens next. Because the best risk teams are the ones where someone is always willing to say, what are we assuming here? What is limiting us? So if on the exam, you see a scenario where the team found a risk, but skipped reviewing the assumption log, make sure you revisit it. Look at that assumption log. Don't just jump into response planning. What assumption analysis did you put into place? What assumptions have you already analyzed and thought about? All right. Now let's move into task 3. Task 3 has to deal with documenting risk triggers and thresholds based on the context and the environment. This right here is all about our early warning system. We've identified the risks. Now you need to know when it's coming. And that is what a risk trigger is. A trigger is the smoke before the fire. Now, I want to make sure we're clear here. It's not the fire itself, it's the smoke. It's what, too often we think risk triggers are it triggered, it's happening. No, a trigger is it's going to happen. So this can't be the moment the risk happens. The signal, the warning is an indicator that our risk is about to become an issue. And this tells us something is about to go wrong and we need to do something about it. And the reason why I stress that is because it matters, enormously for your projects and your project risks. Because if your trigger is the risk event already reacting, then your trigger is an early warning signal. It's just letting you know the risk is now an issue. You need to give yourself a chance to respond to the risk before the damage ever lands on your project. So, a good example for this is a server. If we have a risk around a server going down under a production load, right? Our trigger is that our CPU usage exceeds 90%. Because we know if it gets to 100%, it's going to shut down. We're going to lose all capabilities. So the trigger fires when the team hits 90%. That way they know at that point they need to respond to this risk. Because then they can hopefully reduce the risk, they can eliminate the risk, they can mitigate the risk, they can do whatever they have to do to make sure it doesn't actually become an issue. So they act, they scale, they escalate, they do what they have to do because the early warning system is doing its job. That is a risk trigger. And for every risk that you document, you need to capture four things: the cause, what creates the conditions for the risk, the trigger, which is the specific warning system, the timing, when is the project most likely to catch on fire, and the consequence, what happens if it does. That is what makes a risk register actionable. And that is what the PMI-RMP teaches in Develop a Risk Register. Because in there, it talks about making sure that that's what we're talking about in task 3, document risk triggers and thresholds. We need to make sure we know what our triggers are. Now, thresholds, these are things that, we need to understand as well. This is something that not just candidates for the PMI-RMP that I work with in my exam prep courses, that's not just something that they miss. This is something that project managers in the real world are missing all the time. And that is our thresholds. Our thresholds were set based on our context, but the context changes overall. Your project environment changes. Stakeholders' priorities shift. And sometimes your thresholds were set too conservatively or they're set too loosely. So part of your role as a risk professional is to empower your stakeholders to challenge your thresholds, to actually set what are we looking at when it comes to how much risk our organization could take on. And then establishing how much risk can we take on, versus how much risk is the point where once we hit this point, we can no longer sustain it. So remember, a trigger is not the risk event itself. Exam questions will test this distinction on the RMP. The vendor missed the deadline is the risk event. The vendor progress shows 30% behind schedule at the midpoint. That is a trigger. So you need to make sure you understand the difference. And you need to make sure that you are documenting your thresholds. How much risk can your organization take overall? Vice, at what point are you going to lose track? All right. So, does your organization track risk triggers the right way? And are they put in your risk register? Again, let me know down in the chat, whether you're on the Zoom call, whether you're on a live event, throw it down there or drop it down in the comments if you're watching the replay of this later. All right, that is task 3. We're moving along pretty good right now. So now let's move into task 4, developing the risk register. So everything we've done so far in tasks 1, 2, and 3 comes together in task 4, all about the risk register. Now, when it comes to risk register, I want you to, maybe change the way you're thinking about it. You think about risk registers as a spreadsheet, right? It's a list, it's a static document. It's just something that you have because your organization requires you to have a register. So it's something you probably fill out at the beginning of your project, dust it off when something goes wrong, or you need to reference it for a meeting. That is not what I or PMI mean by a risk register. Risk registers are a living document that you need to use throughout your projects. It's a database that is always current. It's updated constantly, and you're constantly reviewing it, doing full refreshes at major phase reviews when a risk becomes an issue, or when you close out tons of risks and you need to reanalyze, or especially my number one time that I always tell about people, you need to refresh your register, is when you have a change request. If you have a change request that goes in, it changes something on your project, especially when it comes to your timeline, your budget, or anything like that. You definitely need to make sure you go through and you reanalyze, go right back into this process of risk identification. Because everything we identify goes into this register. So we validate the risk. Is it real? Is it actually relevant to the project? That's what we're doing through this identification process. And then we put it in a register. We make sure that every risk that we identify is in there. From there, when we get into analysis, now we're going to go through and we're going to start determining the rack and stack. Right? That's when we go into this probability and impact assessment that I'm sure you're pretty aware of. But what we do is we take our risks, classify them as threats and opportunities. We put them in the register. And it's just a list of risks. And that's what we're focused on here in this domain with risk identification. In risk analysis is when we take that list and we start rack and stacking. So therefore, we know what our top 5, our top 10 risks actually are. Here, all we're focusing on is identifying the risks, putting them in a register, and giving them identified risks and triggers. So remember, we document our risk triggers. Now we're making sure the risk triggers are in the register. We're putting those attributes like probability and impact. Again, we're putting those in there, but we're not doing the full analysis yet. We established the risk origin and ownership. Is this an internal? Is this external? Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? Every risk in your register needs to be labeled with this information. So, yeah, that right there is tasks 1 through 4. That right there, 1 through 4, they are what we consider domain 2 of the PMI-RMP when it comes to risk identification. It's not overly complicated, not as complicated as what some people put it out there to be. All right. So before we close out domain 2, I want to give you some mindsets of what PMI is looking for in the situational questions associated to this domain. 3 things. First one, identification is continuous. All right. So we are constantly going through. We don't just do it at kickoff. We don't do quarterly reviews. We're always identifying risk, always listening to what our stakeholders are doing, always watching what's happening in our projects. Identification never stops. until the project closes. 2, use multiple techniques whenever we're identifying our risks. Brainstorming, document reviews, expert judgment, checklist, SWOT, PESTLE, Delphi, all of those different techniques. Don't just use a single one, because no single one is going to catch everything. That is why that's how we attack our unknowns, our known unknowns, our unknowns. We got to find them. And the only way we find them is through multiple different techniques. And the best risk professionals I know, and the best ones that are doing the right things, are layering their approaches with these different type of identification exercises. And 3, distinguish the terms overall. Triggers are not risk events or risk events. Assumptions are not constraints. Threats are not opportunities. And the exam will test every one of these distinctions. And the mindset that ties all 3 together: be curious, but have some discipline. Because the best risk professionals are the ones who keep asking, what haven't we thought of yet? And then they document it with enough precision that the rest of the team can actually act on it throughout the project. That mindset alone is what goes from below target to above target in this domain. So that wraps up domain 2. 4 tasks, 1 clear mission. Find the risks, the threats, and the opportunities. Surface the assumptions nobody is challenging. Build an early warning system that actually works. And keep a living risk register that the whole team can use. Now, that's what I need you to do before tomorrow when we come back and we start covering domain 3, where we're going to jump into risk analysis. So again, go pull up the PMI-RMP Exam Content Outline if you haven't yet. That is free. You just really Google RMP Exam Content Outline. It's going to show up. Next, get that ECO breakdown that I have in that Notion document. Link should be in the chat, and it's in the description of this video on YouTube. All right, so you can go and grab that whenever you want. That right there is a great resource for you. But read through domain 2. Go through all those different areas that I spell out. How Agile uses this, how hybrid projects. Go through the practice questions and let me know how you did on them. All right? Highlight every enabler that you don't understand. Because remember, if you can't explain every enabler within the exam content outline, then you're going to have problems on the RMP. And if you're serious about RMP, check out my RMP Prep Lab, my community. Again, link is in the description. In there, I have practice exams. You have access to me. You can jump on the Zoom call by being on the YouTube Live, where after I close out this YouTube Live account, I'm going to sit here and talk to the Zoom guys. Take in their questions. See what thoughts that they have. Where are they struggling in their studying right now? That is the best way you get one-on-one coaching with me, really. And also, I have a full exam prep course as a PMI ATP. Link is going to be in the description, or you can always go to 44riskpm.com, look at the RMP exam prep course under the courses tab. I'm going to drop a link right now in the comments where you can go to the RMP. My next course is scheduled for August, but I'm looking at running a course in June, a Monday through Thursday, Tuesday through Friday, something like that. I'm looking at running one in June. I'm just looking for people to let me know that they're up for something in June. All right, because I'm up for it. I love teaching this. And tomorrow, make sure you come back, same bat time, same bat channel, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to jump into risk analysis, qualitative analysis, quantitative analysis, probability impact, Monte Carlo simulations. And I'm even going to show you a tool that I have just to give you a little bit of coaching on how Monte Carlo simulations are used in what they actually produce. This is where the technical depth kicks into a lot of what a lot of candidates struggle with. All right. You don't want to miss risk analysis. If you got value from today, always drop a comment, subscribe to the Bearded Risk PM, share this series with anyone in your network who's serious about studying for the RMP. Again, I'm Russ Parker. I'm the Bearded Risk PM. Stay proactive, overreactive, and I'll see you all tomorrow.